What's up, it's Arthur. So I'm actually doing this voiceover in post because I tried to record this video twice and forgot to double check my microphone both times. So, yeah, but this is gonna be a track breakdown, breaking down my remix of Primavera Azul, which is by Fritz. It's a very good track. I have wanted to remix this thing ever since I've heard it, about a year ago. It's so good. I wanted to put my own spin on it. So, like, I didn't wait for stems or a project or anything. I didn't even ask. This is a bootleg. This is a remake. So let's start with the intro. What I've got here is the original audio of the intro. And under that, I've got this pad, which I made with Helenko, which is by Feld Instruments. Very, very good instrument. It's like a rompler. I don't know how it works. Anyway, and it's just playing this slowly increasing chord, this slowly swelling chord pad. Which brings us into the first section of the intro. So I started with a re-space, because I thought that would layer up nicely, which I've got here. So it didn't really layer up the way I wanted it to. It was too flat under everything. It didn't sit nicely. So I volume automated it, I filtered it in, and I turned it from a Reese into sort of a pluck bass. And I've got it resampled here. Just some distortion and low pass filter on it. That's mostly it for the intro. The other thing I added was this kick, which is a Dark Cat kick. Very kind of a dull, woody, low end kick. What you're going to see a lot in this breakdown is that I use a lot of samples and chops from sample packs and stems and things. And it's really more, to me, about bringing all of that together into a cohesive song rather than me trying to design every single part. So that's it for the intro, and that brings us to this lovely turnaround from the original, let me show you how. Which leads us into the first drop. The first thing I made was this chord, which in the original, these chords are like bit crushed. What I've got here is not a saw. That's the second time I've done this, actually. It's a sine wave. There's like a high shelf that's moving for a little bit of resonance. Some volume automation, some noise, and it's being downsampled and sampled and held. Like I said, the original, most of the drop is bit crushed in a way, which is, it's a good sound. It just wasn't what I wanted. So I remade those chords in Serum, and that's layered up with this really chunky saw bass that I made that is like an asymmetrical saw being FM'd into a sine wave with some noise. It's disgusting and terrible, and all of the processing I do is also disgusting and terrible. It's mostly compression and distortion, but it really takes it nicely. Basically what I'm doing is I'm FMing the sine with the saw so that all of the ticks from the saw get put into the partials, the zero crossings of the sine. Yeah, all the processing in the back end is gross, but it's fat as hell. Yeah, saturation, EQ, distortion, OTT, which I've learned not to use since then, but like I said, it works. That's basically it for the drop. It's actually those two elements that made up most of it. It is accented with this hollow point bass. Let me turn off all the processing, the post effects, and show you what's going on here. All right, so I've got a rounded saw and a rounded square, sine square, with a weird ratio. It's like +4, +2 octaves, +33 cents, which changes depending on the note you play. It's just adding weird FM harmonics to the sine wave in the bass and the rounded saw. That's being distorted, compressed. Big distortion, big compression. The supercharger is mostly just taking care of the transient, so it's not drastic. Wave shaper. So, dimension expander. I'm using this kind of like a chorus, kind of like a reverb. It adds to the stereo image, and it mostly doesn't destruct the low end, but it just slightly widens things. OTT for that over-the-top compression sound, and EQ to get rid of the super low end that was being brought up by it. Saturation knob. More distortion. So the next thing here is this lead that's kind of a chord, but not really. So this is a very noisy sine wave, which is just sort of being distorted and flattened together. Most of the processing is only just to slightly widen it, slightly saturate it. The important part is the reverb. See, this isn't even, it's not even a chord, it's 2 notes. But it layers up nicely with this form instrument. Form is like this granular sampler, has very fine controls over the speed of the samples that you're using to turn into instruments. It also has some additive oscillators and things. I've got it playing this bell sound, which I thought layered really nicely. The harmonics were, well, harmonic. They fit together nicely. The important thing there is the reverb swell, which I'm using ROM. Room. So the next important layer is these pad chops. I got these from Mama Yudofu. And they are just atmospheric pads that are chopped really short. And those are all the wrong note. At least their fundamental is the wrong note. So I've got this first one, I'm emphasizing a very particular tone out of it, some frequency shifter to get it in the right place. The second one is pitched differently. It's got different EQ, so I'm removing frequencies, adding frequencies. They all emphasize different colors, the different bits of the frequency spectrum in the high end, and they blend really nicely. And they emphasize the harmonics of that sort of hollow point bass. God, that reverb's obnoxious. And so these elements with the pad chops and the lead act as the call and response to the downbeat chord and bass. And that conversation between these two makes up most of the drop. So the next thing I started adding was drums. I've got this Dark Cat kick for the low end, and on top of that, I have a Matt Zoe kick, which I'm using because it has more of a acoustic kick beater sound and some more air on the top end. They layered up really nicely. So then I've got a clap from Matt Zoe. This clap I stole from Dark Cat, who stole it from somebody, I don't know where. So then I started adding some other toms and texture samples. I've got one from Hit Kit, which is a tom that sounded like the tom in the original Primavera Azul. And then I've got this click from a sample pack Andrew Huang did with Moon Hooch, which is just a bunch of weird saxophone noises. And then hi-hats. Just a bunch of very interesting high frequency, high color, high texture hi-hats. How many times can I say the word high? This one's from Deadmau5, don't tell him I stole it. This one is from an old Flash multimedia interactive website. It wasn't a game or anything. It just had some animations that played with some interesting sounds when you clicked on something. I don't know, it was fun, and it had good sounds, so I downloaded those. The website was called Patatap. I don't believe it exists anymore. There's this more metallic, sort of a realistic hi-hat that I got from Hit Kit, kind of a Delaware sound. Another Hit Kit sound. This one's an open hi-hat that I've shortened all the way up, sort of volume enveloped. And those form the basis of the drums for the first section. which has this funky, not really a break beat, but it is a break kind of groove. There's this very bright metallic hi-hat, which I've shortened up and not automated. There's this, which is just the actual sound of a drumstick hitting the edge of a hi-hat, which I haven't EQ'd at all. Very bright, very colorful samples. I'm using that very short hi-hat as kind of a ghost note shuffle in between the open hi-hats. The other thing I've got going on here is this sound, which is very aggressive, but I felt like it fit nicely. Kind of a color bass kind of fill. And it's a square wave and a sine wave with a like 2-to-1 ratio. I'm using sync, I'm using FM. It's just got strange harmonics going on. There's a high pass that's shaping the bass as well. It's just getting your standard dubstep post-processing, Camel Crusher and OTT. It sounds a little disgusting on its own, but it fits nicely, I thought. I've also got it going into this vocoder so that it flattens it out into a wider, less bright sound. Yeah, OTT, Camel Crusher, some EQ. The other thing I've got going on here is this Mr. Bill sample, which I got from a sample pack. It was like a pack of stems that he did a while back, I believe. Then this layer of drums is just, I started adding samples where I thought they would be nice. This one's from Panatap. It's a hit and a splash cymbal. That one's just a stomp. So these are DCPM. That's a clap. This is a Virtual Riot cymbal, which I've reversed. I'm just using it to pull into these two samples. I've got this, which is from a very old sample pack. I don't remember where I got, but it's this very bright bell, which I've reversed. And I'm using that to form the high harmonic content for this reverse under a Panatap cymbal, which is like a delayed tone, which I'm using reverb to fill out and hold to pull you into the next section. What I ended up doing a lot of was having this very steady groove and adding things that would push or pull you and emphasize the next section. So there's a lot of those in there. Speaking of the next section, I switched to 4 on the floor. I added a snare, doing a garage shuffle. And I added a bunch of hi-hat loops to sort of emphasize the shuffle and the groove. There's a lot of hi-hats in this song, honestly. Another snare for emphasis because it's having to compete with the kick now. I guess not compete, but layer up with the kick. Look at that, another hi-hat. This one's from Matzo. It's a very bright metallic hi-hat. I haven't processed that at all, except for to shorten it a little bit, tighten it up. Here's another snare that's emphasizing that garage shuffle. All of it builds to emphasize a groove. So then I started adding these fills. Some of them are hit kit samples, some of them are Mr. Bill toms, some of them are from Panatap. There's a clap from Kashmir, I think, there. This clap might actually be from Alan Moore. I'm not totally sure. But it's a pre-shifted snare, which I've just cut off at the snare, so it's only the pre-shift. And again, pulling everything forward. I never did figure out why this wouldn't play, but this is a sample of me whistling. It layered up nicely in the final product. You can't hear it in this video. Sorry about that. So the only other thing I think I show in this first section are these little melodic fills. This one is a patch I made in Serum, which is a horizontally mirrored sine wave that is layered up. It's got some weird harmonics. It has a phaser quality. And I'm playing it into a vocoder, which emphasizes that. And with it all layered up as a chord. And then over top of that, I put this sample from that Moon Hooch and Drew Huang pack, which is just a strange reverberation resonant tone from a saxophone, which sounds like this. And then on top of that, to brighten everything up, I've got this coin foley, which I use in a couple of places in the drop. And this slots nicely into a gap in the instrumentation of everything else in the drop. It just sort of cuts off and plays this phasery, resonant color fill, if you will. The only other thing down here is these ghost snares from Cone Sound and a couple of other samples from my library, which I just use to emphasize the groove. Again, these are just like ghost notes if someone was playing this on an actual drum kit, which is, I mean impossible because there's like 15 layers of hi-hats all at the same time. It sounds a little chaotic on its own, but I promise you it emphasizes all the groove with everything together. One of the most important samples, though, in this layer are these pre-shifted snares from Cone Sound. They're using some sort of amplitude modulation, very fast volume LFO that speeds up or slows down, kind of an exponential rhythm. And I'm using those to, again, pull everything forward. And these worked out really nicely because they're very distinct in the mix. So in the second half of the drop, I introduced this Barely Alive splash cymbal and this cut of a vocal sample that's just shortened a lot. I do this a lot in my production. I like the way that it sounds as an instrument. And this one is, again, emphasizing the slight shuffle to everything, the slight swing. Got a Virtual Riot vocal sample, which is kind of an atmospheric pad. I'm just volume automating it to emphasize the straight ahead groove. Another hi-hat, mention that, from bass this time. This one's very bell of a cymbal. So I started layering up an instrument, which is just a pizzicato string, which I'm using in Flex, which is kind of a rompler, but it's like Nexus, so it's only presets. And it comes standard with FL Studio now. Very useful. I like the way it layered up. There's a delayed sine pluck, which is playing sort of a polyrhythm in the background. I wanted to emphasize more of the groove, but I wanted something that didn't happen on every beat or just on the downbeats. Needed a little something more interesting for your ear to catch on to. So because there's more in the second half of this drop, I needed another clap. This is a fill made out of different bass samples from his sample pack. All of these people that I'm shouting out, you should go check on Splice or wherever. So this is a sample that I stole from Joe Ford. This is a break from the 70s, which is layered up with a Snail's House snare. Definitely Ujiko. So this break, I cut away all the instrumentation except for the vocal sample and the pad. And I've got these Virtual Riot rim shot snares, which are being filtered through RC20 and some EQ and some reverb. And it's got this Future Garage lo-fi feel to it. That noisy crash is also from Patatap. I also start layering this Future House bass because I needed more color and more tonality to everything. So then I started adding these bass fills. This one is an FM bass. It's got two sine. Wow, I said saw for sine before, and now I'm saying sine for saw. I'm a professional producer. Anyway, this bass is based on Fox Stevenson technique, which is just a heavy sine and then your actual FM bass on top of it, both being distorted together. This one is a very noisy saw sine type bass, similar to the saw bass in the first part of the drop. But this one's much more destructive and noisy, and it really gets distorted, but without sounding too distorted. And then I'm just emphasizing different harmonics with the filtering and the EQ in post. I'm also modulating some things inside the patch. So this is a layer that's resampled from that noisy lead. I'm running it into a granular synth, and I'm using it to sort of hold as a form of delay. It's very affected before and after that, but it's this kind of hit and then the held grains. Similar to a delay, but it's a different sound. It really gets obvious in the second half though. And that kind of ties everything together tonally. This is a sample that I stole that I should probably stop saying that I stole these, but I sampled this out of Overwatch. This is a injury sound effect sample of Tracer breathing. And I put this in a lot of my songs because I feel like it has this sort of sympathetic psychoacoustic effect where even if you can't properly hear it, you want to breathe along with it. And if you're breathing in rhythm, you're feeling the music in a different way. Does that make sense? It's very subtle. You barely hear it in the song unless you're actually listening for it. This, and we'll come back to that. So the only other thing in here, besides all the ghost note snares and all that, is different fills. So to end the second drop, or the second half of the drop, I wanted this sort of whirlwind fill. So I have this virtual riot sample. I wanted to emphasize some more of it, so I layered it up with another one. Couldn't really hear that one too well, so I layered that with another one. I wanted to emphasize the kicks because I had to high pass both of those layers. So here's a kick sample. Wanted to emphasize a slower rhythm. So here's a snare that's doing that. Mostly a kind of a high-end tone. So here's the Ujiko snare. Here's a Teddy Killer snare. Another kick. There's a bass snare. A bunch of random drum roll bullshit and everything on top of that. It's all layers. And it all comes together to form one big caveman fill. Check. Which brings us nicely in the next section. There's also Teddy Killer's splash symbol in there. So this break, or bridge if you would like to call it a bridge, I started by listening to the original over and over. And it's got these same bit crushed chords, which again, bit crushing is a nice sound. It wasn't what I needed, so I remade those. It's the same chords that I'm using in the drop, but I've cloned the patch and I've adjusted it so it's a little softer. And it's playing this dotted eighth note pattern. Also, I started layering these reversed pianos, this very colorful, bright, atmospheric pad shimmer thing. And these are forming this like shimmer and shine on top, sunlight glinting off a lake, just to fill out the space behind these chords. It's present in the original, for it has these chimes and this pad under everything, but I really wanted to bring out this bright, warm, magical feeling, so I just layered everything up. And then to emphasize my chords, I added a layer of flex again. I've got woodwinds, strings, brass, all doing slightly different articulations, but they all layer up. I really just went for this garden orchestra. And all that layered up nicely, and I had it like that for a while. It was missing something. So eventually I came back to it, and I opened Flex again, and I got this piano. I was going to use Imagiro piano, but it was a little too soft, which is good for some things. For a sampler, rompler, preset piano, this sounds really good. And it should be noted that I did not play this. I did not, MIDI keyboard any of this. I just wrote all the notes in by hand with my mouse. I think it sounds good. And that brings us into this next build-up section, just similar to the build-up from the first drop. So I started bringing in drums. I didn't bring in the kick, but I brought in everything else to sort of bring back the groove. And then we're back around to one. Yeah, it's a bass piano sample. The first drop and the second drop are mostly the same. One of the bigger differences is I started bringing in this sample. It's a vocal from the end of the original Primavera Azul. It's like the end of the song is after everything has stopped playing. But it was so lovely, and I thought it added nicely to what I had. So I have that layered in there. This, told you we'd come back to this. So this is an instrument I remade in Serum. It is the lead instrument from Green Parrot Tamagotchi. In the first drop, I'm just playing a couple of little quotes from Tamagotchi. And that just plays occasionally in the drop. So this is a much longer quote from Tamagotchi. It's actually just the lead melody of, I think, the second half of it. Which takes up the first half of the second half of the second drop, which is just a mouthful. Other than that, I don't think the first and second drops are any different. There's also this at the end, which is the same lead playing something over the caveman fill. I couldn't figure out if this is actually in Tamagotchi or not. And with all of that put together, that brings us into courtesy beats, because I wanted this to be DJ friendly. I really wanted people to play this out. I'm really proud of it, actually. And that's it. Thanks for watching.